Hello everyone, welcome to the business thesis and hypothesis building portion of the human-centered design module within the Georgia Tech Junior Design class. Let's dive right in. This module will center on two things. The first is the business thesis, and the business thesis will be built on hypotheses. So by the time you're done watching this video, my hope is that you'll be able to generate both a good business thesis and then for that, generate a good set of hypotheses that will support it. Before we dive deeper, let's take a look at where this fits in the broader scope of the human-centered design portion of this class. Over here is the figure that we concluded with last time, and what I want you to do is to be able to generate a good business thesis, and we're kind of showing you here already where it's going to take the format of X will buy Y because of Z, and then know how to build a good hypothesis and establish a set of hypotheses that, when all true, will support the business thesis. Once that's done, you're going to go out and conduct interviews as a way to test these hypotheses, as well as plan out how to use the tool of a minimum viable product in order to further establish a different set of these hypotheses. So let's start with the business thesis. As you saw in the earlier figure, for this class, we're going to take the following format for our business thesis. It will be a statement that simply says X will buy Y because of Z. Let's take a closer look at what each of these three variables are. The purpose of X is to define your customer segment. This gives the person that you're pitching to the scope of the problem in the sense that this is the specific customer segment that you're going to target. Now, to have a good X, you need to make sure that it is specific enough that an understanding of that customer segment will define all of the features that you need for your product to be successful. In most cases, you're not going to start out by dominating the market for every single human being in the world. There's a popular saying that if your customer segment is everyone, then you don't have a customer segment. So when you're defining X, make sure that you're specific enough that the boundaries of X will tell you what your initial niche customer segment is for you to establish a foothold in the marketplace. Next, we look at Y. Y, in this case, is the product. So this is just a very short description of what it is that you are seeking to build your company or your idea around. And the third thing, Z, most importantly, is the set of virtues or features. So not what the product does, but what it is about the product that will make the customer buy it. Very importantly, it is not about the what the product is, because you're kind of describing it here, but it is the why. To further illustrate this, let's take a look at a few examples. All right, here's our first example. Now, let's have a quick exercise, take a few seconds and think about what's wrong or what could be done better with this business thesis. First of all, let's highlight what X, Y, and Z are. You can see that X is people, your product, Y is a ride-sharing app, and then this here is Z. Now, what are the issues we see here? Let's go in order. First of all, people is not specific enough, right? Again, to that earlier comment, if your market is everyone, then you don't have a market. The second, Y, my ride-sharing app, that's not too bad. That basically is what it is. But more importantly, the thing I want to emphasize is Z. And what's wrong with the Z here? The main issue is that it is more a what it is, right? Which is not what we want. What we want is this thesis needs to talk specifically about why the ride-sharing app is a good solution, right? It's not just that it helps them get to their destination, but what are the specific features about the ride-sharing app? Tying this back to the earlier portions of this class, the main thing that you want to get out of Z is it will help you get the customer requirements that you will later build your project around. Now, conversely, let's look at a revised business thesis and let's see what the differences are. First of all, you can see that the X is more specific, right? Urban residents. And the main thing that gives you is it gives you the target people that you would like to do your customer discovery later on. So for the specific purpose of this class's activity, it tells you who are the people that you need to do customer discovery with, that you need to interview, that you need to show your minimum viable product with. As I mentioned before, the why in this case should be fine. In this example, we're talking specifically about a ride-sharing app. But let's now take a look at the Z. In this case, the Z talks specifically about the key features that make the ride-sharing app more preferable than the existing solutions, and enables them to get there quickly. It enables them to get there affordably. So buses are affordable, but maybe not as quick. And vice versa, maybe like a limousine service would be quicker, but not necessarily affordable. And then the other feature that we put in is reliably travel without being concerned about parking, right? Which is a feature specific to urban residents. And that tells you that whatever solution you'd come up with, be it a ride-sharing app or anything else, needs to have these three features. And these become the customer requirements that you set out to achieve when you're designing your solution. Now let's go over to the second topic in this module, the hypothesis. What is the purpose of the hypotheses? Now we just talked about that in the beginning, you have your business thesis. This is the central idea that you're going to bet the farm on, right? You're going to quit your day job and go and make it happen. But before you do that, you would like to know that it works, right? So the second thing that we want you to be able to do is to think about what are the assumptions that need to be true for this business thesis to stand. Or to put it in another way, what you can come up with a bunch of hypotheses. So H1, H2, H3, all the way to Hn, right? You have a bunch of supporting things that all need to be true. So let's just, in engineering terms, let's just stick an AND gate here. And all of these hypotheses need to be true for your business thesis to stand. So what you want to do is break this business thesis, this total money-making idea, into a set of hypotheses that can be testable. That way, you can then, in a structured manner, test each of these one by one. And as each of these are proven true, you gradually increase your confidence that this business thesis has legs, and then you quit your day job and go after it. Ultimately, what it comes down to is using the scientific method, right? And you'll see this in a bunch of different places in teaching concepts such as teaching for research, or in this human-centered design case. A lot of what people talk about is applying the scientific method to things that are outside of strict definitions of science. Now, how are you going to prove these hypotheses? In this class, we're going to look into two approaches. The first is interviews. So you go out and you directly talk to the customers. This is a discipline that is often called customer discovery. And in the strict definition, you actually do this before you even come with a business thesis. You actually are supposed to start out with a complete blank slate, go out and talk to your customer segment, and then through that discovery process, you then define who your target market is, and then come up with your business thesis. In this case, we're going to go straight to having a business thesis for the sake of time, but we are going to look at interviews as a potential way to prove out some of these hypotheses. In this example, let's just say you come up with a bunch of hypotheses that all together will give you good confidence about the business thesis, and maybe just the first two can be solved with interviews, right? Can be established with interviews. The second means that we have to prove or disprove a hypothesis is through the use of a minimum viable product, or an MVP. And what an MVP is just a quick and dirty way to test out your solution. So it might not have all the features, or you might have faked it but it gives you an idea. It gives the people that you're interviewing an idea of what the solution looks like. And again, when you come up with this, maybe hypothesis 3 can only be proven out through an MVP. So you attribute that to MVP, but maybe hypothesis 2 needs a combination, right? You do an interview with an MVP in order to prove whether the second hypothesis is true or not. We'll talk more about this MVP process in a different module, but let's conclude by making sure that you can walk away being able to formulate good hypotheses. Let's start by looking at the first example hypothesis that we have. So people will use a ride-sharing app if it's fast and cheap. Before we talk about what's wrong with this hypothesis, let's first go over what a good hypothesis should do. A good hypothesis should do three things. The first is that it should support the thesis if it's true. So that's kind of obvious. If this is true, it should buttress the validity of the business thesis here. The second is that the hypothesis has to be not obvious. And now this might sound like something that's different, but they often go hand in hand. Often, something that fails this test is simply because it is not specific enough. For example, if I were to say that people would like their mobile phones to have really long battery life, that would be obvious. There's no reason to waste your time testing that. However, the main reason that it's not obvious enough is because it's not specific and quantifiable. So if you were to say, people will adopt this new widget if the battery life is long, at least this many hours, then that would be specific enough that it no longer fails the not obvious test. The third is that the hypothesis must be testable. A hypothesis is only useful if you can actually do a study around it, seek to disprove it, or have it come out and support the business thesis. So with these three principles stated, let's take a look at this example thesis here. People will use a ride-sharing app if it's fast and cheap. Well, first of all, it does support the thesis, which is a good thing. If it's true, then your business thesis of people use a ride-sharing app will be further strengthened, so that's good. But taking a closer look, what else is wrong with it? First of all, the subject, people, is not specific. It doesn't really identify who you're going to be getting the data from and who your target market is. The second thing is the latter part of the sentence, fast and cheap. First of all, it is obvious that if a ride-sharing app or a solution that you're proposing is fast and cheap, people will like it. The reason it fails the test is because it is not specific enough. You're not talking about how fast and how cheap. And the other more subtle thing is that this is a compound hypothesis. Ideally, you would like to separate this into two hypotheses so that you can examine them separately. And if you were doing this rigorously later on, once you've proven these two to be true, then you go back and examine the and relationship. But going back to the second criteria, the reason that this fails the not obvious test is often because, in this case, it's not specific enough. So you can fix that by simply making it more quantifiable. And that also solves the third problem. The hypothesis, as stated, is not testable. So with that, let's take a look at a revised hypothesis. Urban residents, so in this case, we are identifying our target market. We'll use a ride-sharing app, and then the latter part here, if the total travel time is within 15% of the time that it takes for them to drive themselves. In this case, again, like the first one, it does support the thesis. And if we look at the second criteria, it isn't specific enough that you actually do have a question, right? Is 15% the right line? That's something that you may not know the answer of off the top of your head and is worth taking the time to test. And then finally, because it is quantifiable enough, it becomes something that you can design a test around. So in summary, in this module, we talked about the process of stating a good business thesis and the process that it takes to generate a set of hypotheses and test them. With this information, you now have the foundation you need to methodically explore your business idea.